Well, welcome everyone to the second breakout session. I hope you're having an engaging and interesting experience so far. And we want to spend some time today talking about relationships, and specifically talking about some risks related to intimate partner violence and conflict that might be related and linked to the past year that we've all spent dealing with COVID, and where that may lead us now and in the future in terms of offering resources and ensuring veterans have access to care and tools that they need to be as successful as they can in their relational health. I am very excited. My name is Katherine Doyle. I'm the Intimate Partner Violence Assistance Program Coordinator at the Phoenix VA. I'm very excited to co-present with my colleagues at both the Northern Arizona VA and the Southern Arizona VA. So Ms. Beth Goldstein is a licensed clinical social worker who is the Intimate Partner Violence Assistance Program Coordinator up at Northern Arizona VA. And Chris Guerrero is a licensed clinical social worker who is the IPV coordinator down at the Southern Arizona VA. So we kind of represent the whole state. We want to work together to make sure that we don't let any veteran go unserved. And we want people to talk today. So we've unmuted you all. You are welcome. We have made it so you could all unmute yourselves. Please feel free to do that and make comments. This will go much better if you are willing to be on video, and certainly if you're willing to speak, we can answer chats and stuff like that, but it will be much easier if you could just talk with us.
Okay. So I guess before we get going here, and you can see the question that's posed there, but I just want to also maybe make note, you saw the title of the presentation and we're talking about intimate partner violence. And one of the things that we do know is that, there's no definitive profile for somebody who uses or experiences violence in their intimate partner relationships. That might include, some of the people that are participating right now, in this presentation. So we just want to be mindful of that. And if you need to take care of yourself, please go ahead and do so. So the first question that we have here, we say, what is a healthy relationship? So we know that relationships can look a lot of different ways. We know that everybody's definition of what a healthy relationship can be different. And we're really just interested to kind of get people's ideas about what that may be. So please feel free to either comment, what is your definition of a healthy relationship? What are components of a healthy relationship? Or maybe even put it into the chat for us. What do you think a healthy relationship is? And kind of maybe help us get a better idea. So we know that they may be different, but there also may be some kind of through lines or some themes that are present for folks. And I'd be really interested to hear what that definition is for people. So please do that.
And we are all therapists, which means that we can sit for very long periods of time and not say anything. And I can survive that. So this is my encouragement.
Very comfortable.
Yeah, this is my encouragement to you all to kind of take the leap and feel free to talk.
And we do have a share in the chat box that says a healthy relationship is engaged and supportive based on respect.
Very good. And I could imagine that there might even be some folks that are in here right now that definitely agree with that. Yeah.
And another share is healthy boundaries, safety, trust, respect, honesty. These are all good answers. Yes.
I've heard respect a couple of times, and how to define when somebody is behaving in a respectful manner. What does that look like? How do you know when you're experiencing respect or being respectful? In full disclosure, Beth, I can't see the chat box. So I'm gonna let you be the chat box person.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Somebody shared when how you think and feel are being acknowledged. And that would be very true. That's a good way to put that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. When I think about, even thinking about trust, in relationships, trust is a big word. It can mean a lot of different things, for folks. So I wonder if people even have thoughts about that. How do we define trust in a relationship, or how do we know when trust exists in a relationship? I think are like, some big kinds of questions that, are kind of worth considering. So thinking about, relationships or trust being supportive or like positive actions towards one another in a relationship.
Yes, and that's a share in their supportive, positive actions, consideration. Yes. And it's important to feel safe and comfortable when speaking openly and honestly with your partner.
So I hear, consideration in a couple of different directions, maybe being considerate of your relationship partner, right? And maybe how they think and feel, their wants or needs. But then I would imagine as well, being considered in your relationship, that what you think and feel, what you want and need is something that is recognized as well.
Okay. There are lots of important things and kind of difficult to accomplish on a day-to-day basis of maintaining a stance and an interactive space where everybody feels balanced. Yeah, balance is important. That everybody feels that there is a balance and equitability and trust and safety and mutuality.
I'm kind of thinking about, one of the comments about positive actions. So, when I hear that, I think about, behaviors that maybe lift one another up in the relationship, as opposed to, behaviors that, kind of break one another down or tear each other down.
Mhm.
Right. Being able to openly talk to your partner about your likes, your dislikes, hopes, dreams, and even your fears and your worries, and be accepted for that.
Mhm. So shall we move on? Yeah. So we know that in the recent, whoops, I can get this to go, months, some of those kind of healthy relationship patterns have been challenged a bit for a number of reasons we'll get to in a moment. But before we move on, we want to also reflect on maybe what the other side of that pendulum looks like. And in terms of our talk, what we're referencing when we say intimate partner violence.
Yeah, so on this screen, it shows you the different areas that are included in intimate partner violence. And I'd like to share with you what the VA's working definition of intimate partner violence is. And you'll see it's rather inclusive. So intimate partner violence is any violent behavior, including but not limited to physical or sexual violence, stalking and psychological aggression, including coercive acts by a current or former intimate partner that may occur on a continuum of frequency and severity. And it can range from just one episode that may or may not have lasting impact to chronic and severe episodes over a period of years. And also, it should be noted that this can occur in heterosexual or same-sex relationships, and it does not require sexual intimacy or cohabitation. So as you can see, many people have a image or a vision of what the term domestic violence is, and what we're talking about here is a much wider perspective of these behaviors.
And I would just kind of maybe add something to that as well. When we think about, terms like intimate partner violence or domestic violence, I think the big kinds of categories, or maybe the words or the terminology that we're pretty familiar with. So when we think about intimate partner violence, we might think about physical violence, overt acts of physical violence or aggression, or we might even think of psychologically aggressive or abusive behaviors, sexual violence. And those big kinds of terms I think are maybe a little bit more well known for folks, but kind of what we show here is really kind of nailing down a little bit more and identifying like the real specific behaviors that we know undermine safety in relationships. And sometimes those kinds of behaviors are the ones that we don't hear a lot about. So just for example, there in that section where it says psychologically like violent or aggressive behavior, we think about humiliating, name calling, criticism, controlling what your partner is allowed to do, where, withholding information, isolating from friends and family. And when we think about those kinds of behaviors, those are the ones that really give us an idea of the behaviors that may exist in a relationship, again, that undermine safety and create risk, not only for the person that is experiencing those behaviors, but even for the person who might be using those behaviors in their relationships. So we don't often think about that either, is what kind of risk does that create for people who use violence or aggression? There's a lot of different risks that we can think of, but there's definitely wide-ranging effects, not just for people who experience, but also for people who use these behaviors as well.
So some important elements to note about an abusive relationship dynamic is that this can occur in a relationship with very little physical violence. There may have not been an incident of physical violence, or there may have only been one. I've known stories where people have had one violent incident in the beginning, and that was enough to enforce coercive and abusive talk, because once someone knows that this level of violence can occur, then they're well aware that if it happened once, it could happen again. Also, a lot of times it can be non-physical violent behavior can be downplayed. An example would be someone going into a doctor or therapist's office and saying, well, this relationship, at least she doesn't hit me. That happens more often than one would think. Another thing is that individuals can be isolated from others. That's a key factor in abusive relationships. They have a smaller and smaller circle of support. Partners can interfere with their health care, and this can happen by a partner maybe always showing up with them to their doctor's appointments, so they can't really freely talk with their doctor about what's going on. Or it may be, in the other case, interfering and keeping them from accessing any health care in fear of, well, what might you say? So then we have poor compliance with patients suffering from abuse. And can you think of anything else? Okay, we'll do the poll question now. Yeah.
If any of you could just fill out the survey, it may not be hard to figure out what the answer might be, given the topic of the conversation today. So we have 8 people who have filled it out so far, 9. Pretty much everybody saying that COVID has probably increased the prevalence of IPV. And given what we were just talking about, kind of the context of what a healthy relationship is and some of the context of what an unhealthy relationship might look like, it's not surprising that a pandemic that leads to increased stress and restrictions, staying home together and not having any support outlets or ways of getting away to diffuse and de-escalate things might lead potentially to some increases in some of these problems. So you're all correct. Mm-hmm. We have lots of evidence to show that that the pandemic has increased the experience of intimate partner violence for folks. And here's some stats. This comes from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It's not specific to Arizona, but they did a survey where they looked at from the dates of March 16th to May 16th in 2020, the number of calls that came into the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And there was an increase of 9% in the total contacts that were received at that time. That led to about 6,210 folks calling into the hotline and specifically saying that they were calling in related to issues that were linked to COVID. So this was an additional percentage of people than normative number of calls. And those folks who did call in tended to suggest that COVID was part of what's creating problems and leading to them to need to reach out for services. There also was some indication, and I don't know if it's reflected specifically in this graph here, that when people did call into the hotline, that they tended to call in later in the cycle of difficulties. They tried to hold on, they tried not to call, they tried to just weather the pandemic and get through, but then they finally reached a point where the aggression had escalated enough where they had to reach out for help. And so when they were calling in at that point, they tended to be calling in with their higher degree of violence occurring in the relationship. And these are some of the comments that were shared by folks calling into the hotline. One caller said that they couldn't file the paperwork to remove the abuser from their home because the courts were closed. So even the resources that people needed to get help if they did want help weren't available to them during this pandemic. Some of the chatter stated that they had known for a long time that there were red flags in the relationship, but things really escalated with the pandemic, and they weren't even able to go to therapy to get help for those experiences they were having. Some of the other chatter mentioned that the abuser was using the virus as a scare tactic to keep the survivor away from the kids. You know, you can't be around the kids because you're going to infect them. It's going to lead to somebody getting sick. And a caller was experiencing an escalation of their abuse. They had tested positive for COVID-19, and the abuser was using isolation to keep them from contacting other family members and getting help and getting resources. And the abuser threatened the survivor with deportation. So there were immigration issues related to some of the threats that were being made.
When we think about, locally, on a local level with maybe in Phoenix in particular, but I definitely know that this is the case down here in Tucson and Southern Arizona as well, that law enforcement receiving an increase in requests for service for domestic violence related incidents as well. And this is some information here from the Phoenix Police Department. The calls for domestic violence were up 21%. During that time period in 2019 or in 2020 versus 2019, March 20th to March 27th. Domestic violence related calls in Phoenix had doubled since the start of the pandemic, according to the Phoenix Police Department, as well as domestic violence related deaths across Arizona having increased at 140% compared to this time last year. So when we think about, violence and aggression in relationships and some of the effects of violence and aggression from the earlier slide that Beth was speaking to, and what behaviors look like, some of the consequences or behaviors can even lead to the point of serious injury or death. And that's definitely something that has been present for us here in Arizona on a local level as well.
And I also would point out that we know that from other stats that we're not presenting, that veterans specifically are at increased risk over civilian populations of both experiencing intimate partner violence and using these behaviors in their relationships. And sometimes there's mutual violence that's occurring. So this is particularly relevant when we're thinking about serving and making sure that veterans have safe relationships.
And I would just, in addition to, the information for the National Domestic Violence Hotline, but even for our own VA crisis line, that the amount of veterans, family members that have been reaching out to the Veterans Crisis Line for support, increasing number of those regarding relationship health and safety issues. So when we think about the ways that people access veterans in particular, how they access care services, those points of care are definitely seeing the prevalence of relationship health and safety concerns in veterans or family members of veterans that we serve. And just some additional information here when we think about that poll question, do we think that the pandemic has had any domestic violence has increased, decreased, or had no effect as a result of the pandemic that we're currently in. And I think most people, everybody answered, and it definitely hasn't had an increase, and that's very present in some of the news coverage. And these are just some headlines to consider, that overall there's an awareness that risk to relationship health and safety is on the rise, not just in veterans families, but across all families.
So having established that, yes, indeed, the pandemic has certainly contributed to an increase in what has been a longstanding problem and issue in our society, both civilian and veteran population. We'd like to know what your thoughts are on what about how COVID has made otherwise healthy relationships become strained and has increased the experience of IPV in already struggling relationships. So this is the interactive part again, and we'd love to hear from you. You had some great ideas before, so we want to hear some more of those ideas. How specifically does this pandemic affect what would be a healthy relationship that became strained, or one that already had IPV? How would that worsen potentially?
Hi, this is Penny Toro. I've been searching, trying to figure out how to unmute myself.
Thank you, Penny. I so appreciate your persistence.
I figured it out. Okay, so I'm just going to take a stab at it because I have to look at my own self and ask these questions. And due to this pandemic, being actually removed from the office and actually working at home full time, having that healthy interaction with others outside of the individuals in which you live with. And it appears that in other relationships, when you're struggling, already, and then now you're stuck into pretty much the four-cornered wall box. And that adds and that escalates onto, okay, it could be a financial issue, it could be one of the parties is sick, and so therefore that adds on to it, and a whole little behavioral health situation can bloom and explode just from that. Not having that freedom to actually come and go at your leisure, and to be confined necessarily. So that's my little piece.
Well, thank you. And actually, that's quite a big piece and a very timely, and gave it very timely. So you're absolutely right. All of those can be ways that COVID has increased the strain on healthy relationships and already struggling relationships. I'd like to share that we have some answers in the chat box too. So some of the shares were more isolated from family and friends. Absolutely, definitely friends, extended family. So more isolation can definitely breed more contention in already struggling relationships. People were drinking and doing drugs more. Yeah, I even heard something about how the sale of alcohol has increased drastically through this pandemic. So absolutely right. That's a very good answer. And then getting on each other's nerves by being in the same space. Yeah, absolutely. Close quarters, nowhere to go, no outlet. These are really all good answers. You guys are spot on. We didn't want to leave you hanging, so we have some ideas of our own that we'd like to share in the next slide. So Experiencing loss of normal support system. Now you're going to see that you've touched on a few of these. Normal support system like childcare, also contact with others who could notice IPV and or express concerns. Also, during the pandemic, partners can withhold necessary items. And these are ways of controlling coercion. You know, examples are hand sanitizer, soap, cleaning supplies. Share misinformation about the pandemic to control or frighten their partners. There was enough of that misinformation going around, and yes, it could be used against someone. Preventing partners from seeking medical attention if they have COVID symptoms or other acute or chronic illnesses. And escalating control and isolation tactics. So, for example, using COVID as a scare tactic to prevent a partner from seeing their kids, accuse their partner from trying to infect them with COVID, or assisting or visiting family members or friends. So again, more isolation.
And if we just take that childcare piece, that one item of all of a sudden kids are at home, if you have kids, and we got to figure out, how do I get them to do schoolwork online and work and potentially deal with all of the stuff that's going on around having just to manage and make it through this pandemic. So just that one piece is enough to kind of, for many people I was working with, just to super increase their stress and their anxiety level.
Right. So some additional issues, and I think there were a few of these touched on already too, but economic insecurity and poverty related stress. So many lost their jobs or had other types of financial stress, then unable to maybe meet their rent and other regular bills. So it adds stress in communication in the relationships. Again, quarantines and social isolation. And we already touched on, again, reduced health services available. Some were closed and or had less hours of open for business. So inability or limited options to temporarily escape an abusive situation. And then, of course, disease-specific sources of coercive behaviors by an abusive partner. So all of these compounded.
Mm-hmm. More of many of the same things are listed. As all of these issues started to surface, not only was there more intensity and stress and anxiety going on within the home, where you were stuck and not able to get out and get help or just have a moment of breathing. But then you watch the news, and the world around us also was having really, really big things happening and going on, which there was this pervasive level of stress and anxiety coming at us, not just from what was happening in our homes, but in the world broadly speaking, which led to more and more opportunities for relationship conflict and disagreements. There's lots of people, even amongst family members, disagreeing on a various and multitude of different social issues that we're facing as a society right now. And even just talking about those things could increase conflict.
You know, when we think about, the midst, all of us really, kind of working through and living through the midst of this pandemic and the amount of loss and grief, right? So, as of April 8th, but I think even this morning, I think it's well over, or closer to 570,000 people have passed away as a result of COVID-19, which just kind of is a bigger opportunity or a bigger chance that somebody, somebody that's maybe being impacted by COVID or has lost their life to COVID. So when we think about loss and grief being present as well for people in their lives, and the increased chances for that being something that creates stress, in relationships, in the home. When we think about, the financial hardship that most folks have been talking about already, we know just here locally in Arizona, the amount of the unemployment rate has increased here in Arizona, with more and more people being not being employed, and a 40% kind of increase or a change from this same time last year, February of 21. People had mentioned the increase of alcohol and substance use. And we know that for people who are experiencing anxiety and depression are even more at risk of using substances in order to be able to cope. So we think about the kind of compounding effects of people experiencing mental health symptoms and then kind of managing those mental health symptoms in ways that maybe might not be so helpful, and the kind of risk that that creates, in relationships. And just when we think about, what kinds of demands are on people's backs, right, on people's lives. And we know that in September of this last year, 865,000 women in particular had left the workforce. And we think about that time frame kind of coinciding with young people going back to school, right? And we think about what kinds of demands are there for people in their lives, and women in particular, and what that means for shifting responsibilities, financial hardship, other kinds of demands that it definitely can create stress, for people in their lives and relationships. Access to services with just the shutdown, and people's ability to be able to access care, or limited time frame or limited availability for care. But we know just here in Arizona ourselves, we rank pretty low, right? And the availability of healthcare providers, mental health care providers in particular, and just some information here, Arizona ranking 47th amongst us 50 states in the availability of mental health care providers. With the addition of the constraints that the pandemic has had on all of us, but even more so with the availability of mental health care service that people had the ability to be able to access even pre-pandemic, can we see increasing the feelings of hopelessness, depression, despair, and then the lack of availability to get connected to resources to be able to help cope in healthy and safe ways.
So all of that awful stuff, but we want to leave you on with hope and good stuff. So we're going to shift gears slightly and say that while all of that was happening, VA and many other community partners were working really diligently to try to find ways creatively to reach out to people and to offer them help and services through this really difficult time. And we're continuing to do that. And I don't know about you all, but I am a person in the context of everything that's happening too. So much of this, stuff that we're talking about is not this distant nebulous thing that I'm not emotionally connected to. I mean, for all of us, we should have some grace and just take a moment to breathe and some sense of compassion for ourselves, because these are tough times for everybody, even the healthcare providers who are trying to be of assistance to other people. There was a great article that came out about psychologists are struggling with the pandemic too, and how all of us are in this together, and that we can have compassion for one another and all the difficulties we faced and are making it through. We're making it through. So we want to spend a moment just talking about the VA has these programs that have been developed at all of the VA facilities, but certainly we have robust programs at the Northern Arizona VA and the Southern Arizona VA and at Phoenix to address the needs of veterans who are either experiencing intimate partner violence or even just increased conflict, that you don't have to acknowledge it's IPV. Maybe it's just things have gotten more difficult in your relationships, or people who are even using these behaviors because they're struggling and they're not, they're being more irritable. Maybe they're having substance abuse issues themselves. Maybe they're struggling just to deal with all the things that are going on, and it's leading them to be more reactive and more aggressive in their intimate relationships. We have resources and services for all of those folks. We can offer them via telehealth. So if you can't make it into the hospital, we can meet with you and still provide you resources and help. We can now meet many veterans face-to-face if that's needed. So we just want people to know that we are here and we do have things to help. For instance, we at Phoenix VA offer a program called the RISE program for veterans who are experiencing intimate partner violence, and it stands for Recovering from IPV Through Strengths and Empowerment. It is a short, evidence-based I would say protocol, and by protocol, I mean there are modules, there's information, there's educational resources connected to it, but it is very individualized and very flexible. So if somebody's experiencing these kinds of relational issues, they may want to talk about things like safety planning or how that might be impacting their health, their medical health and well-being. Might want to focus on things like improving their coping and self-care abilities, or how to enhance their social support given the context of where we're at right now. How to make difficult decisions when perhaps you have these two competing values, like you really love your partner and things are, just really difficult right now, but you also really love your children and you feel like they're being impacted by the context of your relationship right now. And when those two things are in conflict with one another, how do you make decisions and move forward? And so it gives you some ideas on how to approach those kinds of difficult decision-making processes and use some tools to help with that. Also, resourcing, giving you resources and figuring out a plan for how am I going to move forward in a values-driven way. So we're excited to offer this program for veterans who are either experiencing now intimate partner violence or over the last year have experienced it. They don't have to be in a relationship right now to be experiencing these difficulties. A lot of veterans I work with have separated from their partners, but they continue to have ongoing interactions around childcare and other kinds of things, maybe dealing with the house or whatever they're still struggling and having to contact one another with. And they're still continuing to figure out how do I do that and stay healthy and stay safe and stay as empowered as I can possibly be. Oops.
Yeah, and so also considering, during these times and some of the difficulties that, that we had kind of outlined and people have spoken to, and we think about the risk of using violence or aggression in relationships. And so one of the programs that we do have available, that's available across the state with the VA here with the Intimate Partner Violence Assistance Program, is a program that's called Strength at Home, right? And Strength at Home is specifically for veterans that might be struggling with anger or aggression in their relationships, to learn skills to be safer in their relationships with partners and others. It's an evidence-based program that's trauma-informed, that really takes into consideration the effects of trauma histories in people's lives, and the risk that creates for using violence and aggression in their relationships. And Strength at Home is something that focuses specifically on violence and aggression in intimate partner relationships. When we think about trauma or trauma histories, that can mean a lot of different things. For some folks, obviously we're talking about veterans, maybe you've been in the military, we think about experiences maybe that people have had during combat. But we also know that there's a lot of other kinds of experiences that might be a part of people's lives even prior to the military. So when we think about interpersonal violence, we think about growing up in homes or spaces that are not safe, that are risky or dangerous, maybe growing up in a home where domestic violence was taking place or intimate partner violence was occurring. There's a lot of different kinds of experiences that definitely impact how we see ourselves, how we see other people in the world, and influence our functioning and the choices that we make or behaviors we use in our relationships, especially in response to, high emotionally charged situations, and the kinds of behaviors that we can use that create risk for ourselves or for other people. So there's a couple different things that we're doing in Strength at Home, focusing more so on like education and kind of understanding what violence and aggression is, what abusive behavior is, and really working towards identifying the behaviors that we use in relationships that create risk, and kind of taking responsibility for that. Understanding and exploring some of the things that we know underlie trauma and trauma exposure, and that connection to aggressive behavior and kind of what that means in our relationships, the risk that it creates for our relationship partners and for ourselves as well. And then really focusing on the skills that help us engage in our relationships in ways that are safe and respectful of ourselves and our partners and other people. There's also some work that we're doing, some skills that we're learning to manage, to manage stress in our lives more effectively, do that in a way that's, again, safe and respectful of ourselves and our partners. And we know that there's plenty of stress points in our lives. We spent a couple of slides kind of looking at that. So we know that stress is present for people right now in their lives, and we kind of learn how do we manage that in ways, again, that is like effective and helpful for us and our partners, as opposed to doing that in ways that create risk. So the kind of the format of the group is something that can happen through, like Kathy was saying, through VA Video Connect, which is the VA's online secured telehealth platform. It's a group format that takes place for 2-hour sessions over 12 weeks that are relatively small. We try to have between 5 to 8 veterans that participate in the program that all kind of start together and end together. It's something that's co-facilitated in order to facilitate the time and space effectively. Their groups are pretty intensive therapy based, meaning that we're looking at group members being active participants in the process and considering their choices and behavior, as well as being willing and able to provide feedback to one another in the group around choices and behavior, offering different perspectives and things to consider, or maybe things that we haven't considered in relationships before. It is a group that does accept veterans that may be justice involved, but it's not only for justice involved veterans. It's for veterans that understand, relationship conflict or the risks that creates for themselves in the relationships, and they want to engage in a process and learning how to be safer and more effective in the relationship. So it's open to all veterans that are eligible for healthcare services at the VA. And it's definitely a motivational kind of approach. So we're really working to create some awareness and motivation for the behaviors that I'm using in relationships or risk of using in relationships that might undermine even what I want, what I envision to be a healthy relationship, and really generating some buy-in to work towards making changes that are in line with what I want in regard to healthy relationships, goals for communication, in my relationship, and making choices that are in line with, what I want and need. And doing that away, again, that's safe and effective for everybody. There was some session topics there that you might be able to kind of take a look at, so people can get a general just overview of some of the content that people who participate in Strength in Home, what we would be focusing on for people who choose to participate.
Well, and lastly, we certainly want to provide you with some national resources. And as you can see, you can read those slides. And I believe, I think this presentation might be available to you as well afterwards. Is that correct? Yes. So what we'd like to leave you with is, as you can see, the entire state of Arizona VA IPV program is represented here. And what we would like you to walk away with, in addition to everything that we've shared, is that, and we've talked about how COVID has impacted and increased the frequency and severity of this, this real concern of social issue of intimate partner violence. That said, we want you to know that we are available for prevention and early intervention. We don't want you to wait until it gets too bad. We want you to know that this program is here for you at any point in your relationship issues. If you want to just improve your skills and ensure that your relationship doesn't end up with these struggles, we are available to you. So please seek our help out. And again, here are some national resources available to you as well.
I think that was it. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments as we finish up today?
Just want to say thank you for the information that was shared on today. It was extremely helpful.
Thank you for that comment. It's important that we all work together collaboratively as a community to kind of identify people who maybe could use some help and get them into the care that they need in whatever form that takes and whatever way that looks. So let us be partners with you if there's situations that you want to just problem solve or think through.
That's great. Being a behavioral health care manager, I encounter quite a bit, and domestic violence is actually one of them that have come across my desk a few times. This is Penny, by the way. I'm sorry, I'm just talking.
That's okay. That's good, Penny. That is good. Yeah. Well, thank you.